The battle had only just begun. The human soldier Mark stood his ground as the alien warriors circled around him. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their weapons hummed with deadly energy. Mark's heart raced, but his resolve was unwavering. He had faced countless dangers before, but nothing like this. The aliens had come to Earth, and they wanted to take it for themselves. The leader of the alien force, a towering figure with skin that shimmered like liquid metal, stepped forward. She was tall, at least 12 feet high, with a presence that made the very ground tremble beneath her feet. Her name was Rhea, and she was the one who had led the invasion. Mark could see the pride in her eyes, but he saw something else as well. Doubt. The briefest flicker of hesitation that seemed to haunt her every move. Rhea stared down at Mark, her voice a soft echo in the quiet battlefield. "I am not like the humans," she said, her words almost a whisper. "I am not as beautiful as your women. I am not what you would call desirable. Yet here I am facing you, about to destroy your world." Her eyes locked with his. "Why do you resist?" she asked. Mark took a deep breath, his hand steady on his weapon. "It's not about beauty, Rhea," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's about survival. Earth belongs to us, and we won't give it up without a fight." He stepped forward, his weapon raised. The aliens around him tensed, ready to strike at any moment. But Mark's words had cut through the tension. It was clear that Rhea was not expecting this kind of response. "You think you can stand against us?" Rhea's voice was filled with a mix of amusement and something deeper respect. She had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now she could feel it. Mark was different from the others. There was something in his eyes that made her question everything she had been taught about humans. They were supposed to be weak, fragile, easy to conquer. But Mark, standing there before her, was showing her a different truth. "I don't care about your beauty or your power," Mark said, his voice unwavering. "What matters is that you're here, and you're trying to take something that isn't yours. You're trying to take our home, our families, our future. And that's something we won't allow." His words were like a declaration, a promise to himself and to the world he fought for. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the tension of 1,000 unspoken words. Rhea's gaze softened slightly, but her expression remained firm. She raised her weapon, her eyes never leaving Mark's. "Then let the battle begin," she said coldly, her voice filled with the weight of her people's intentions. Mark braced himself, every fiber of his being prepared for the fight of his life. He knew he was outmatched, outnumbered, and facing an enemy like nothing he had ever seen. But he wasn't about to back down. He couldn't, not when the fate of his world was on the line. Rhea's forces moved in, their weapons flashing with deadly intent. But Mark was ready. The first blast came, but he ducked just in time, his feet moving swiftly beneath him. He had trained for this moment, every battle, every challenge leading to this one decisive moment. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for Earth's future. The war had begun, and there was no turning back. Mark knew that he was not fighting alone. All of humanity stood behind him, their will unbreakable. The battle had only just started, but Mark was already making a mark in history. And Rhea, though she would not admit it, was starting to realize that humanity was not the weak, helpless species she had been led to believe. Mark's body was aching, but he wasn't about to give up. The alien forces were relentless, but so was he. He had fought in wars before, but never on his own soil. Never with the future of his entire species hanging in the balance. This time, the stakes were higher. Rhea stood tall, watching as Mark moved through the chaos. She had expected him to fall, to break under the pressure. But he didn't. He kept fighting, his movements sharp and calculated. Each step he took was a testament to the human will to survive. Rhea couldn't help but be impressed. She had led countless battles, yet this human was unlike any she had encountered. The battle raged on. with explosions lighting up the sky and the ground shaking beneath their feet. Mark's hands were steady as he fired back, taking down alien after alien. His heart pounded in his chest, but his focus never wavered. This was his moment, the moment when he would show the invaders that humanity would never bow down. Rhea observed the human from a distance, her mind racing. She had underestimated him. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't afraid to die. He wasn't afraid to fight. She had seen fear in the eyes of many warriors, but not in his. His resolve was unshakable, and that made him a dangerous adversary. Impressive. Rhea muttered to herself. She had seen countless beings fall to her forces, but this human was proving to be different. She couldn't help but wonder, what was it about humans that made them so determined? She had heard the stories, but seeing it firsthand was something else entirely. Rhea had always believed that her species was superior, that nothing could stand against them. But this human was challenging that belief. Mark didn't stop to think about the odds. He didn't have time for that. The aliens were advancing, their weapons aimed at him, but Mark had a plan. He knew he couldn't take them all on by himself. But if he could hold them off long enough, reinforcements would arrive. The sound of footsteps in the distance gave him hope. The first wave of reinforcements arrived just in time. The human soldiers stormed the battlefield, weapons raised, ready to fight. Mark felt a surge of relief, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. This was only the beginning. There was still a long way to go before the aliens would be driven back. Rhea watched as the battle shifted. The human forces were gaining ground, pushing her soldiers back. She was starting to feel the weight of the situation. She had not expected this. She had underestimated humanity, and now it was starting to show. But she would not give up. She couldn't. Her people depended on her. The war was far from over. Mark was relentless. His weapon was a blur as he moved through the battlefield, taking out enemies with precision. He was exhausted, but he wouldn't stop. Not when his people needed him. The fight was far from over, but Mark was determined to see it through to the end. Rhea's forces were starting to retreat, but she wasn't ready to give up just yet. She was the leader, and it was her responsibility to ensure victory. She had to find a way to turn the tide. She had to find a way to crush the human resistance before it was too late. The battle raged on, but Mark could see the shift. The aliens were losing ground, retreating under the pressure of the human forces. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a step in the right direction. The humans were proving that they could fight back, that they weren't the weak species the aliens had once thought. Mark could feel the exhaustion setting in, but he kept moving. He had to. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for all of humanity. The war had just begun, but Mark knew that they were not going to back down. Not now. Not ever. The tension in the air was thick. Mark could feel it, as could every soldier around him. The battle was far from over, but humanity was starting to make its mark. The aliens had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. Mark's focus never wavered as he stood tall, his rifle steady in his hands. Every shot he fired felt like a declaration of defiance. Rhea, however, was not one to back down. She had seen her forces fall, but she was still determined. Her people had come to conquer, and she would not allow a few human soldiers to stand in her way. She rallied her troops, her voice a commanding force that cut through the chaos of the battlefield. "Fall back," she ordered, her voice ringing with authority. "We will regroup and attack again. We will not let them win." Mark watched as the alien forces began to retreat. It was a temporary victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. He could see the doubt in their eyes, the realization that they might not have the upper hand. The battle was shifting, but it was far from over. He couldn't afford to relax, not yet. Humanity was not going to let this moment slip away. Mark knew that every second counted. The aliens had taken a step back, but they weren't done yet. He had to make sure they stayed on the defensive. He had to make sure that they knew that humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. Rhea's mind raced as she retreated with her forces. She had not expected this kind of resistance. The humans were tougher than she had thought, and that fact unsettled her. She had seen civilizations fall, but none of them had fought like this. She had always believed that her people were superior, but now she was starting to question that belief. We will not be beaten by these weaklings, Rhea muttered to herself, her hands tightening around her weapon. She could feel the pressure mounting. The invasion was supposed to be easy. The humans were supposed to fall. But now, they were fighting back with a ferocity she had not anticipated. Mark's soldiers were regrouping, preparing for the next phase of the battle. They knew they couldn't afford to lose this momentum. They had gained ground, but the aliens were regrouping as well. The war was not won yet. Mark glanced over at his fellow soldiers. They were tired, some of them wounded, but their spirits were high. They had shown the aliens that they could stand their ground, and they weren't going to stop now. We're not done yet, Mark said, his voice filled with determination. Keep pushing forward. We're not letting them take our home. His words were like a spark, igniting the fire in his soldiers' hearts. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for Earth, for everything they held dear. Mark felt that same fire burning in his chest. He wasn't going to stop, not now. Not ever. Rhea watched the humans' determination with a growing sense of respect. She had thought that they were weak, but she was starting to realize how wrong she was. They fought like warriors, like they had everything to lose. And maybe they did. But Rhea wasn't about to give up. Not yet. We will crush them, Rhea said, her voice cold and filled with resolve. This battle is far from over. We will take back what is ours. Her words were spoken with conviction, but even she could sense the uncertainty in the air. The humans were not like any enemy she had ever faced. They were relentless, and that made them dangerous. But she would not let fear take root. Her people were depending on her. She had to lead them to victory. Mark and his soldiers moved forward, ready for whatever came next. The aliens might have retreated, but they weren't giving up. The battle was far from over, and the outcome was still uncertain. But Mark was ready. He had seen the aliens' strength, and now he knew their weakness. They were not invincible. They were just like any other force. They could be beaten. They could be stopped. And humanity would be the ones to do it. The ground shook beneath their feet as the battle raged on. Mark's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't let it slow him down. The fight was far from over, and he couldn't afford to stop. The aliens were retreating, but he knew they would regroup, and when they did, they would come back even stronger. He had to stay focused. He had to make sure humanity's resolve held firm. Rhea stood on the edge of the battlefield, her eyes scanning the human soldiers. The retreat had been strategic, but she could feel the pressure mounting. She had led countless invasions, but this was different. The humans were proving to be a formidable foe. They were resilient, and they were not going to back down. Rhea had underestimated them, and now she had to find a way to turn the tide. Prepare for the next assault, she ordered, her voice firm. We will not allow them to keep pushing us back. We will show them what true strength looks like. Rhea's warriors gathered around her, their faces set in grim determination. They had tasted defeat, but they were not ready to give up. They would return to the fight with a vengeance, and they would do whatever it took to win. Mark's soldiers were still regrouping, but Mark could sense the urgency in the air. The aliens would be coming back soon, and they would be ready. The humans had shown their strength, but the war was far from over. The battlefield was littered with the debris of the fight, and Mark knew that the next wave of the battle would be even harder. But he wasn't afraid, not now. Not ever. The sound of footsteps approached, and Mark turned to see his fellow soldiers coming forward. They were tired, but they were ready. Mark had seen the exhaustion on their faces, but he had also seen something else. He had seen the fire in their eyes. They were fighting for their home, and they weren't about to lose it. "Are we ready?" Mark asked, his voice steady and determined. "We're ready," one of his soldiers replied. "Let's finish this." The moment of silence that followed was filled with anticipation. Mark could feel the weight of the moment, but he knew what had to be done. The aliens had tested humanity, and they had failed. Now it was time to show them what humans were truly capable of. Rhea's forces moved back into position, their weapons ready. They were determined to push forward, but Rhea couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had fought countless battles, but this one felt different. There was something about the human resistance that made her question everything. She had been taught. They weren't like any other species she had encountered. They didn't just fight to survive. They fought because they had something to protect. "We won't back down," Rhea muttered to herself. "We can't afford to back down." The tension in the air was palpable as both sides prepared for the final clash. The humans were ready. The aliens were ready. And the fate of the planet hung in the balance. Mark's heart beat faster as he surveyed the battlefield. The war was nearing its climax, and he knew that this would be the most important battle of his life. "Hold the line," Mark shouted, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "Do not let them through." The human soldiers moved forward, their weapons raised, ready for the fight. The aliens responded in kind, charging forward with a roar. The two forces met in a storm of energy blasts and gunfire. The battlefield erupted in chaos, but Mark remained calm. He focused on the task at hand. He couldn't afford to let his emotions get in the way. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. Rhea's forces clashed with the humans, the sound of battle deafening. She fought with everything she had, her movements precise and deadly. She was determined to end this, but she couldn't help but wonder what would happen if the humans won. If they managed to push her back, what would they do? Would they fight to the death? Would they make her their prisoner? Rhea couldn't answer those questions, but she was determined to find out. Mark's rifle barked as he fired, taking down one alien after another. His hands were steady, his aim true. He wasn't going to stop. He couldn't. The future of Earth was at stake. Every shot he fired was a promise to his people. A promise that they would not lose. Not today. Not ever. The battle raged on, but Mark's resolve was unshaken. He would fight until the last breath. He would not let the aliens take his home. He would not let them win. Not now. Not ever. The battle was reaching its peak. Mark stood at the forefront, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. His hands shook from exhaustion, but his resolve remained as firm as steel. The aliens were relentless, but he wasn't going to let them take Earth. Not now. Not ever. The fate of humanity rested on his shoulders, and he would not falter. Rhea watched the battle unfold, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of the human soldiers. They were fighting with everything they had, their determination unmatched. It was something she hadn't expected. She had seen warriors fall in battle, but the humans didn't just fight for survival. They fought for their homes, their families, their very existence. It was a battle of wills, and right now, humanity was winning. But Rhea wasn't ready to give up. She couldn't. Her people depended on her, and she would not let them fall. She called for her forces to regroup, her voice cold but filled with the same determination that had led her people across the stars. She would not let the humans defeat them. Not after everything they had fought for. Regroup. Rhea shouted, her voice carrying over the battlefield. We will take back what is ours. The humans will fall. They always do. Her soldiers rallied around her, their resolve matching hers. They had tasted defeat, but they were not ready to give up. The aliens had come to Earth to conquer, and they would do whatever it took to claim victory. They would not let a human army stand in their way. Mark's heart raced as he watched the aliens regroup. He could see the determination in their eyes, but he wasn't afraid. The aliens had underestimated humanity, and now they were seeing just how wrong they were. Mark had fought beside his fellow soldiers for years, and he knew that they wouldn't give up. They would fight to the last man if they had to. They weren't going to let the aliens win. The battle raged on, but Mark could feel the momentum shifting. The aliens were pushing forward, but the human forces were holding their ground. Mark could see the fear in the aliens' eyes now, the uncertainty that had started to take root. The humans were fighting back harder than they ever had before. The aliens might have superior technology, but they didn't have the one thing that made humans dangerous: the will to survive. Stay strong. Mark shouted to his troops, his voice carrying across the battlefield. We can win this. Keep pushing. His words were like a fire that spread through the ranks. The human soldiers pushed forward, their weapons raised, determined to hold their ground. They were no longer fighting just for survival. They were fighting for the future of Earth. They were fighting for every man, woman, and child who called this planet home. Rhea clenched her fists as she watched the humans push forward. She had underestimated them, and now she was paying the price. The humans were stronger than she had thought, and they were willing to fight to the bitter end. But she couldn't afford to back down. She couldn't let this battle end in defeat. Fight harder. Rhea screamed to her troops. Show them that we are the superior species. We will not be beaten. Her voice was filled with authority, but deep down, she knew the truth. The humans were proving to be more than just a threat. They were a force to be reckoned with. And that realization began to unsettle her. Rhea had always believed in the superiority of her people, but now she wasn't so sure. Mark's rifle fired again, taking down another alien soldier. He moved quickly, his feet barely touching the ground as he advanced. The battlefield was a blur of fire and smoke, but Mark remained focused. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for Earth, for everything humanity had built. The aliens would not take that away from him. Not today. Rhea's forces were faltering. She could see it in their movements. They were hesitating, unsure of whether they could win. She had been in many battles, but she had never seen her forces question their own strength before. It was unsettling, and it made her realize just how dangerous the humans were. We cannot let them win. Rhea screamed, rallying her troops. We will fight to the last breath. We will take Earth. But as she shouted the words, she knew that her forces were beginning to doubt her. The humans were proving to be more than just a nuisance. They were a threat, and it was becoming clear that defeating them would not be as easy as she had once thought. Mark's soldiers pushed forward, taking advantage of the aliens' hesitation. Every step they took was a victory. The aliens were retreating, but they weren't giving up. Not yet. Mark's rifle fired again, and the alien forces began to break apart. The humans were winning. And they weren't going to stop. Keep going. Mark shouted, his voice filled with confidence. We're almost there. Earth is ours to protect. The momentum was shifting in favor of humanity. Mark could feel it in his bones. The humans weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win, and that made all the difference. The tide of the battle had shifted. Mark could feel it in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The alien forces were faltering, retreating under the pressure of humanity's relentless defense. His heart pounded in his chest, but his focus never wavered. This was the moment they had been fighting for. This was the turning point in the war. Rhea stood at the front of her retreating forces, her eyes scanning the battlefield. She had led countless battles, but this one was unlike any other. The humans were proving to be stronger than she had ever anticipated. Their will to survive was something she couldn't have predicted. They were fighting for more than just their lives. They were fighting for their future. And that made them dangerous. We can still win this, Rhea muttered to herself, trying to convince herself more than anyone else. We will not let them take our victory. She turned to face her soldiers, rallying them once again. Fall back and regroup. We will prepare for another assault. They will not defeat us. Her voice rang out with authority, but even she could hear the uncertainty behind her words. Mark watched as the alien forces began to retreat, but he wasn't about to let them escape. He knew they would come back with a vengeance. The war wasn't over yet, but humanity had gained a crucial advantage. The aliens had underestimated the strength of human resolve, and now they were beginning to realize just how wrong they were. Don't let them escape, Mark commanded, his voice filled with determination. We push forward now. We end this. Today, his soldiers moved with precision, their weapons aimed at the retreating alien forces. The humans were not about to let the invaders regroup. They had fought too hard to give up now. Earth was theirs to protect, and they would not back down. Not when they were so close to victory. Rhea's mind raced as she surveyed the battlefield. The humans were pushing forward, gaining ground. The fear that had once been absent from her soldiers was now visible in their eyes. They had tasted defeat, and they were starting to doubt whether they could win. Rhea had to act fast. She couldn't let them fall apart now. Regroup now, Rhea shouted. We will fight again. We will not let them win. But the doubt in her voice was evident, and her soldiers could feel it. They had always followed her without question, but now they were beginning to question whether the battle was worth it. Rhea had led them this far, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this fight was different. Mark's soldiers closed in on the alien forces, taking out one enemy after another. The battle was still fierce, but the aliens were retreating, their morale shattered. Humanity was winning, and there was no stopping them now. Mark could see the doubt in the eyes of the aliens, and it filled him with confidence. They had underestimated human strength, and now they were paying the price. Push forward, Mark shouted. We've got this. Don't stop until they're gone. The human forces surged forward, their weapons firing with deadly accuracy. The aliens were retreating faster now, their once imposing line crumbling under the pressure. Mark knew they had to keep going. The war was still not won, but they were on the verge of victory. He could feel it in his bones. Rhea's forces were losing ground fast. She could see it in their movements, in the way they hesitated. She had led them for so long, but now she wasn't sure how much longer they could hold on. The humans were relentless, and Rhea knew that their will to fight was something her people couldn't match. They fought with everything they had, not just for survival, but for their future. No! Rhea screamed, her voice filled with desperation. We will not be defeated, not by these weaklings. But as she looked at her forces, she knew that her words held no weight. The humans were proving that they were far from weak. They were strong. Stronger than she had ever believed possible. Mark could see the victory within reach. The alien forces were crumbling, and humanity's resolve was unshakable. This wasn't just a battle. This was the fight for the future of Earth. And Mark would not stop until the invaders were driven off his planet. Victory is ours. Mark shouted, We are humanity, we will not fall. With a final push, the human soldiers overwhelmed the remaining alien forces. The aliens had been pushed back, their lines broken. It wasn't over yet, but humanity had proven something too. The invaders. They had shown the aliens that they could not be conquered, not by force, not by fear. The fight was far from over, but humanity had taken the first crucial step toward victory. Mark stood at the front of the battlefield, his eyes scanning the horizon. The war wasn't over yet, but humanity had taken a decisive step toward victory. The alien forces were retreating, broken and disorganized. The humans had shown them the strength of their resolve, and the invaders were beginning to realize that Earth was not theirs to take. The battlefield was littered with the wreckage of the conflict, but Mark knew that this moment was just the beginning. The aliens had been pushed back, but they would not give up so easily. They would regroup, They would return, and they would try again. But humanity was ready. They were prepared to do whatever it took to protect their home. Rhea stood in the midst of her retreating forces, her heart heavy with defeat. She had fought for her people, led them across the stars, and watched them conquer countless worlds. But this battle had been different. The humans had fought back with a strength she had not anticipated. They were not the weak species she had been told they were. They had proven themselves, and now, Rhea had to face the reality that she had underestimated them. The alien commander's eyes burned with frustration, but she refused to show any sign of weakness. "We will regroup," Rhea said, her voice filled with cold determination. "We are not finished yet. We will fight again." Her soldiers looked to her for guidance, but they could feel the tension in the air. Their morale had shattered, and even Rhea's commanding presence could not restore it. The aliens had always been conquerors, but the humans were proving to be a challenge unlike any they had faced before. Rhea knew this would not be an easy war. Mark's soldiers were still moving through the battlefield, their mission clear: press forward and push the aliens back as far as possible. Every step was one closer to victory. The human forces were tired, but they were determined. They knew that this was their chance to take control of the war and ensure that the aliens never returned. "Keep moving," Mark ordered, his voice filled with confidence. "This is our time. Let's finish this once and for all." His soldiers nodded and advanced, their weapons ready, their spirits high. They were no longer fighting just for survival. They were fighting for the future of Earth. Mark could see it. In their eyes, their unwavering determination. They were going to win, and they were going to make sure the aliens knew it. Rhea's forces were regaining their composure, but the damage had been done. The humans had shown them that they were not invincible, that they could be challenged and defeated. Rhea clenched her fists, her mind racing. She had always believed that her people were the strongest, but now she wasn't so sure. She had to regroup, to plan her next move. She would not let the humans take Earth. She couldn't. The humans were pressing forward, relentless in their pursuit of victory. Mark could see the alien forces starting to falter, their ranks thinning as they retreated further. He could feel the tide of the battle shifting in his favor. The aliens were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. They were breaking, and humanity was closing in for the final blow. "Press on," Mark commanded. "We're almost there. Earth is ours to protect, and we will not stop until the last alien is gone." The sound of the human forces moving forward was like a wave crashing against the alien defenses. The humans were no longer playing defense. They were on the offensive now, taking the fight straight to the invaders. The aliens had no choice but to retreat, and with every step they took, they felt the grip of defeat tightening around them. Rhea's face was hard as stone, but inside, she could feel the weight of her failure. Her forces were scattering, broken, and demoralized. She had failed them. She had failed her people. The battle for Earth had been lost, and there was nothing she could do to change it. "We have to leave," Rhea said, her voice barely a whisper. "We can't stay here. The humans have won this battle." The alien forces began their retreat in earnest, abandoning their position and retreating into the distance. The humans had won, and they had proven something to the aliens they were not to be underestimated. Mark watched as the alien ships disappeared into the sky, his heart still pounding with the rush of victory. It wasn't over yet, but they had secured a crucial victory. The humans had shown their strength, their unity, and their determination to protect their home. They had fought with everything they had, and they had won. It was a victory that would go down in history, a victory that would be remembered for generations to come. The battle for Earth was far from over, but humanity had taken the first step toward securing their future. Mark stood tall, his eyes looking out over the battlefield. The war was far from finished, but they had proven that they were capable of overcoming any challenge. They had shown the aliens that they could fight, and that they would never give up. Earth was theirs to protect, and they would do so with everything they had. Asterisk. The war was not over, but the aliens had been dealt a blow they would not soon forget. Mark stood at the forefront of the battlefield, looking out over the scattered remains of the conflict. The alien forces had retreated, but the humans knew. This was only a temporary victory. The real fight had yet to come. The aliens would regroup, they would return, and they would be more determined than ever. But the humans had shown them that they were capable of fighting back, of pushing forward. In the face of overwhelming odds, Mark's heart still pounded in his chest, his body sore from the battle, but his mind was sharp. He had seen the aliens retreat, but he knew this moment was fleeting. The war was far from over, and humanity had to be ready. Earth had been defended, but the aliens would not be easily discouraged. They would learn from their defeat, and they would come back stronger. Mark had to make sure that humanity would be ready to face whatever came next. "Stay vigilant," Mark said to his soldiers, his voice steady but filled with determination. "The aliens will return, but we won't stop. We'll keep fighting. We'll keep protecting our home." His soldiers nodded, their faces set in grim determination. They had fought hard, but they were not done yet. The victory they had achieved. Today was important, but it was only the beginning. Mark knew that they had to remain focused. The battle was far from won, but they had shown the aliens that they could be beaten. Rhea's heart was heavy with defeat. She had led her forces across the stars, had conquered countless worlds, but this battle had been different. The humans had proven to be more than she had expected. Their will to survive, to fight for their homes, had broken the confidence of her people. Rhea had underestimated them, and now she had to deal with the consequences. She had failed in her mission, and her people would pay the price for that failure. The alien commander's mind raced as she retreated with her forces. She had to find a way to regroup, to plan for the next stage of the war. She could not afford to let her people be defeated. They were a superior species, and they had come to Earth to conquer. But now she was beginning to question her own beliefs. The humans were not the weaklings she had thought they were. They were stronger, more determined, and they were willing to fight for their planet. "We will return," Rhea muttered to herself, her voice filled with anger and frustration. "We will show them what true power looks like." But even as she spoke those words, a part of her knew that the battle for Earth was far from over. The humans had proven that they were willing to fight for their survival, and that made them dangerous. Rhea had once believed that her people could conquer anything, but now she wasn't so sure. Mark's soldiers were still moving through the battlefield, making sure that the alien threat was completely neutralized. The victory had been hard-earned, but it was worth every moment of sacrifice. Mark knew that the battle was not over yet, but they had taken a crucial step toward winning the war. The aliens might have superior technology, but they lacked something the humans had: heart. They fought not just for survival, but for everything they held dear. "Victory is within our grasp," Mark said to his soldiers. "But we cannot stop here. We cannot let our guard down. The aliens will return, but we'll be ready. We'll always be ready." His soldiers nodded in agreement. They knew the fight wasn't over. The aliens would come back, but they would be ready. Humanity had proven that they could stand up to the most powerful force in the galaxy, and that would never be forgotten. The aliens would remember this day, and they would never underestimate humans again. As Rhea retreated with her forces, she could feel the weight of her failure bearing down on her. She had lost, and there was nothing she could do to change that. But she was not one to give up easily. She would regroup. She would plan, and she would return to Earth, stronger than ever. She had been bested by the humans, but she would not let that defeat define her. "They've won this battle," Rhea said to herself, "but they will not win the war. We will return, and we will take what is rightfully ours." Mark watched as the alien ships disappeared into the sky. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The aliens would come back, but so would humanity. Earth was their home, and they would do whatever it took to protect it. This victory was just the beginning. They would fight, they would stand together, and they would never give up. The humans had shown their strength. They had proven that they could overcome any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable it seemed. The war was not finished, but humanity had taken the first crucial step towards securing their future. Earth was theirs to protect, and they would fight for it every day, for as long as it took.